What if the world has been warning us all along, and we simply chose not to listen? They say disasters arrive without warning, that earthquakes split the ground without a whisper, that storms swell without a hint, that tragedy is a sudden, merciless intruder. But what if that's a lie we've told ourselves to feel safe? What if, long before the earth trembles or the skies collapse, the signs are already there, etched into stone, painted on walls, or hidden in plain sight where no one bothers to look? For centuries, humanity has stumbled upon strange markings, cryptic shapes carved into doors, drawn into sand, or burned into wood, mere days or even hours before catastrophe strikes. To most, they're meaningless scratches. To those who know, they are omens. In a dusty village in Italy, a jagged spiral appeared on the side of a church one cold November night. Within 72 hours, the town was underwater, the river swelling far beyond what history had ever recorded. Across the world in Japan, a series of intersecting circles were drawn in chalk on an alley wall, an alley that, days later, was reduced to rubble by a sudden blast. Even now, the survivors whisper about those symbols, their voices low, as if afraid the shapes themselves might hear. You could dismiss these stories as superstition, just random coincidences stitched together by frightened minds. But then you begin to notice how these markings repeat. The same patterns showing up in different countries in different centuries before wildly different tragedies. Circles before floods. A three-pronged fork before fires. Spirals before violent winds. At first glance it feels impossible. Yet history is full of impossible things that turn out to be true. So the question lingers like a shadow. Are these warnings from something watching us, or invitations to events we cannot stop? Each of these symbols seems to appear quietly, as though whoever, or whatever, creates them doesn't want to be seen. No one ever catches the moment they're made. 1 hour the wall is clean. The next, the mark is there, freshly etched, waiting. They arrive without witnesses, and yet they are always perfectly placed, positioned where the largest number of eyes will see them, but too obscure for anyone to truly understand until it's too late. Some researchers claim these marks belong to an ancient code, one older than language itself, a visual script carried through generations by secret orders, traveling silently through time. Others believe the source is far darker, that these are not warnings but seals, triggers set to mark the moment when a chain of events will be unleashed. If that's true, then every time one of these symbols appears, the countdown has already begun. In the next chapters, we'll uncover 9 of the most chilling verified cases of these mysterious markings. Symbols that surfaced in the hours or days before disasters no one could have predicted. They span continents, centuries, and cultures, yet each one carries the same disturbing thread. Because whether they are the work of prophets, secret societies, or something far older, they always appear just before everything falls apart. So, when the next strange mark appears near you, will you recognize it for what it is? Or will you dismiss it until the sound of breaking ground tells you it's already too late? Have you ever seen a strange mark? A carved shape on a wall, a painted emblem on the ground, or an odd symbol scrawled where it didn't seem to belong, and felt that sudden, inexplicable chill? What if those marks weren't random? What if they were warnings, cryptic signs appearing just before catastrophe struck? History is littered with unsettling stories of people noticing strange symbols in the days, sometimes hours, before disaster. Some were etched into stone centuries old, others hastily drawn in chalk or paint, and a few appeared in ways no one could explain. They weren't merely decorative. They carried an energy, a shadowy presence that seemed to hum beneath the surface, waiting for something to happen. In quiet villages, marks have appeared on doorways the night before fire swept through the streets. On remote mountain trails, strange spirals have been carved into the bark of trees, later found near the site of deadly landslides. In cities, graffiti-like symbols have been spotted days before bridges collapsed or buildings burned to the ground. These are not coincidences people easily forget. The unnerving part is how these patterns and images seem to echo each other across time and continents. A mark seen in the medieval streets of Europe bears an uncanny resemblance to one later spotted on a wall in a 20th century Asian port town. Cultures separated by oceans, languages, and centuries, yet the same symbol appears moments before tragedy. Could this be shared human instinct? Some buried knowledge we don't yet understand? Or is it something older? Something watching? There are accounts from survivors who still recall the moment they saw a symbol, not knowing why it made them uneasy, only to learn later of the devastation that followed. Families have passed down warnings about certain shapes and signs. Never draw them, never ignore them, never stand near them. Sailors whispered about markings on docks before storms. Miners claimed they'd seen strange lines on rock walls before cave-ins. The patterns aren't always identical, but they seem to carry the same unsettling intent. Skeptics dismiss these as tricks of the mind, a human tendency to connect unrelated events. But for those who have stared at one of these marks just before the world around them changed forever, the idea of coincidence feels like a fragile excuse. Because deep down they know they saw it first, and they will never forget. If these symbols are warnings, who or what is leaving them? Have you ever wondered why certain creatures, when they appear in unusual places, seem to carry with them a silent promise of tragedy? In the autumn of 1906, the quiet fishing town of St. Mary's Cove in Cornwall seemed trapped in a postcard. The sea shimmered silver at dusk, fishing nets swayed gently in the breeze, and the air smelled faintly of salt and wood smoke. Yet, 3 days before the town was struck by the most violent storm in its recorded history, locals began whispering about an unsettling visitor. A massive black raven, larger than any they had seen, began perching on the roof of the old church, unmoving, watching the harbor with glassy eyes. It did not caw. It did not shift. It simply stared. Superstitious fishermen muttered that it was the Morrigan's messenger, the ancient Celtic goddess who presided over death and battle. Children refused to walk past the church, claiming the bird's eyes followed them, though it never moved its body. On the second day, it was seen in the cemetery, hopping between gravestones as though counting them. No one touched it, no one dared throw a stone, for fear of what it might mean. On the third day, the sky turned a strange yellowed gray, as if sunlight had been filtered through ash. The raven vanished. That night, a violent storm struck without warning. Fishing vessels were smashed against the jagged rocks, and waves surged through the lower streets, sweeping away anything in their path. In the morning the sea was littered with wreckage, wood, nets, barrels, and the sound of mourning filled the air. The raven was never seen again. Was it merely coincidence that this ominous bird appeared so precisely before the disaster? Or had it been a silent herald, bound to some law older than memory itself? Some locals claimed they had heard of similar appearances in coastal towns before tragedies at sea. Others dismissed it as panic-induced folklore. Yet, the stories persist. In every retelling, the raven always watches, always waits, and always leaves just before calamity strikes. Even today, in certain remote harbors, an unexplained raven sighting will cause fishermen to leave their boats tied to the dock, no matter how calm the waters may seem. Because in their minds, the sea can lie. But the raven never does. Have you ever wondered if the dead can still speak? Not with voices carried on the wind, but through the quiet, stubborn language of bones, soil, and forgotten rituals. Beneath the surface of America's oldest cemeteries, the ground keeps secrets that were never meant for the living to find. Each shovel of dirt ever lifted in these places has risked unearthing not just remains, but a story someone tried to bury for good. In certain regions during the post-slavery era, burial wasn't just about laying someone to rest, it was about binding their soul, making sure it could not return. The rituals used were a strange fusion of African spiritual practices, indigenous beliefs, and the distorted fears of colonial Christianity. Families placed items in the graves, iron nails, shards of mirrors, even the jaws of animals, believing they could keep restless spirits from rising. But over time these customs were outlawed, condemned as witchcraft, and many were forced to bury their dead without the rites that had protected generations. Archaeologists who've studied old burial grounds in Virginia and the Carolinas have uncovered strange burial patterns. Bodies laid face down, stones placed over the chest, or limbs bound with rope. Official reports often downplay these discoveries, calling them unusual cultural practices. But those who know the history understand it was more than just tradition. It was survival. For some, death was not an ending, it was a dangerous crossing, and precautions had to be taken. In some small towns, whispered stories still tell of the root workers, spiritual figures who tended the dead as carefully as they healed the living. They knew which plants to bury with the body to keep evil from following the mourners home, and which chants could soothe the soul so it would not linger. But when these figures died, their knowledge was often taken with them, leaving only fragments of their craft behind. The few clues that survive, a buried jar filled with herbs, a peculiar carving on a headstone, are all that remain of a practice nearly erased from the American memory. Why did these customs fade so completely? Was it because the new laws forbade them, or because the rituals truly worked, and those in power feared what they could do? The fog did not creep in. It stood waiting, already there, as though it had been breathing alongside the earth for centuries. Under the pale wash of moonlight, the narrow dirt path through the marsh was nearly invisible, swallowed by the white shroud that blurred the edges of the world. The air smelled of stagnant water and something older, something that clung to the lungs like wet cloth. They came without lanterns, without the shuffle of feet, without the cough of breath. Dozens, perhaps more, emerged from the mist as if the fog had shaped itself into human form. Their clothing was unfamiliar, layers of cloth bound at the waist, hoods drawn low over faces that never turned. No footsteps met the earth. The procession moved as if it floated just above the ground. A witness from 1891, whose words were later found in a brittle journal, claimed the figures passed every new moon along this same trail. He wrote that he counted them, 28 one month, 32 the next, yet he never saw a face. The shapes seemed hollow, but he could feel eyes beneath the hoods, ancient eyes that were measuring him. The journal ends mid-sentence, the last word written twice, as though the pen was pulled from his hand. Local folklore claimed these were the keepers of the veil, those tasked with escorting the souls of the unburied to their resting place. But the resting place, people whispered, was never a graveyard. Those who followed too closely spoke of hearing a second sound layered beneath silence. A faint, rhythmic thump, as if earth were being tamped down on something that still moved. In the early 20th century, a survey team charting the marsh vanished during a full moon. Only one man returned, wandering into a nearby village at dawn, his eyes filmed over with milky white. He could not recall his name but kept repeating, "They will finish what they began." For weeks he lingered in a trance, his hands moving in slow, digging motions even in sleep. He died without speaking again. No photographs exist of the procession. Cameras, it said, refuse to catch them. The glass fogs instantly, or the plates shatter in their frames. Yet every family in the marshlands keeps one rule. On nights when the fog stands still, and the air tastes of stagnant water, you bar the doors and hide your eyes. But here's the question that has kept historians, folklorists, and even hardened skeptics awake long into the night. If the keepers walk only to guide the unburied, then who exactly are they burying now? The earth here did not rest quietly. Beneath the wind's low sigh and the brittle rustle of grass, something else moved, something that sounded almost like breathing. Locals said it was nothing more than shifting roots, the slow creep of groundwater, or the murmurs of earthworms tunneling in their endless dark. But if you lingered long enough, alone, in the hollow where the old sycamore's shadow stretched like a warning, the sound shaped itself into something else. A whisper. Not of one voice, but of many. It had been this way for as long as anyone could remember, yet no one dared to dig deep enough to discover why. Children were warned not to stray past the broken fence line, where the soil was darker than anywhere else in the valley. Farmers avoided planting there, claiming that seeds rotted in days and tools broke without cause. The stories always ended the same. The earth kept what it claimed. Years ago, before the town stopped asking questions, a group of men had tried to drain the hollow to make it fit for grazing. They drove shovels into the ground, laughing off the old superstitions. By dusk, only one man remained, stumbling back into the village, his face the color of chalk. His hands were scratched raw, his boots heavy with mud, and his eyes fixed on something far beyond the horizon. He never spoke again. The other men were never found. They say that if you press your ear to the ground there at night, you can still hear them calling, muffled, strained, like voices smothered under blankets of earth. Some swear the whispers don't speak in words but in emotions. Hunger, grief, longing. Others insist they hear their own names. Those who listen too long often vanish within the week, leaving nothing but footprints that end at the sycamore's gnarled roots. Even in daylight, the hollow has a strange pull. Travelers on the old road have felt it, an invisible tug at their heels, a compulsion to turn toward the low dip in the land. Some fought it, breaking into a run until the pull eased. Others simply wandered in without realizing it. Not all of them wandered back out. The townsfolk never mark graves in that part of the valley, not because they fear disturbing the dead, but because they suspect the dead already lie there. Buried without ceremony, without stone or name, swallowed by the earth in ages past. No one knows who they were or what wrong bound them to the soil, only that the ground never loosens its grip. That if you were to stand there now, in the last light of evening, you might notice the grass bending in one direction, though no wind moves it. You might feel the faintest vibration under your boots as though something below is shifting closer. And if you stayed long enough for night to fall and shadows to consume the hollow, you might begin to hear it too. What would you do then when the whispers below began to sound like your own voice? They say the dead rest beneath us, but in certain places they do not rest at all. Some are buried not to be mourned, but to be watched. And in the backwoods of early America, there were burial grounds where the soil itself seemed to breathe at night, where small depressions would appear and vanish as if something beneath shifted closer to the surface. The earliest records are fragmentary, letters written by colonial ministers warning settlers to stay off the old clearings because their sleepers rise with the frost. Farmers who ignored the warning found their livestock missing, hoof prints circling their homes, and strange effigies made from straw and teeth nailed to their doors. The bodies buried there were not laid to rest in the Christian way. They were placed upright, facing outward, each with a shard of mirror in their hands so that if they rose they would see themselves first, and perhaps retreat. But some say the mirrors cracked long ago. Travelers told of hearing whispers coming from the earth itself. Not wind, not insects, but a slow, steady syllable, repeated as if calling a name. Dogs refused to cross the boundaries. Horses would buck violently, eyes rolling white, when led near the mounded plots. By the late 1700s, the local militia had cordoned off the area entirely, declaring it unsuitable for settlement. The official reason was unstable terrain. Unofficially, they feared the watchers. Folklore insists these were not the graves of ordinary people but of the wronged, those who had died with curses on their lips, many of them enslaved or executed under false charges. Their bodies were interred with rituals from their homeland, rituals designed to ensure vengeance from beyond. When settlers arrived, they misunderstood these rites, thinking them sinister witchcraft. They altered them, sealed the graves in a way that was meant to bind, but may have only enraged. In 1832, a road crew digging nearby unearthed a figure still standing upright beneath the soil. Its eyes had collapsed into black hollows, but its jaw hung wide as if caught mid-breath. The men filled the hole without speaking, swearing never to return. 2 weeks later, the entire work camp burned to the ground in a fire that left no bodies to bury. Today, nothing remains of the site but a field choked with thistle and black moss. No one plows it, no one builds there, and even deer skirt its edges as if following some ancient pact. But under the soil, they say, the watchers remain, still upright, still facing outward, still holding their cracked mirrors. Waiting. And if you walk there alone, just before the first frost of winter, you may feel the ground shift beneath your feet, as if something below has turned to face you. The trail was supposed to be there. Old survey maps, faded but still legible, showed a clear footpath weaving through the pines, down past a narrow stream, and ending at the stone outcrop the locals called the Shepherd's Rest. Yet when the search party reached the place where the path should have begun, they found only an unbroken wall of undergrowth, roots twisting like gnarled fingers across the earth. The air was heavy, still, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. This wasn't the first time someone had gone missing here. In the last century alone, 12 cases were documented, most of them children, all of them disappearing without a sound. The accounts were always similar. A stroll through the woods, a moment of distraction, and then the person was gone. No footprints, no torn clothing caught on branches, nothing to indicate a struggle. Just absence. One theory held that the ground itself was unstable, riddled with deep fissures hidden by moss. But those who had combed the area swore there were no sinkholes. Others whispered of shifting trails, a phenomenon in local folklore where certain paths were said to rearrange themselves, leading travelers in circles until they either gave up or followed the wrong route entirely. In the village, older residents avoided speaking of it in daylight. Around fires or over late-night tea, however, they would tell stories of lights moving between the trees, white, flickering shapes that lured the curious deeper into the forest. A retired forester once admitted, in a voice low enough to barely rise over the crackle of the hearth, that he'd seen the path appear and vanish in a single night, as if the earth had swallowed it whole. Maps from colonial times hinted at something stranger still. A ceremonial route, carved before European settlement, meant to connect sacred landmarks used by an indigenous tribe. The symbols etched alongside the path's illustration were unfamiliar to modern archaeologists. Spirals and concentric circles, always in groups of 3. Some speculated they marked places of ritual offerings. Others, more grimly, believed they warned outsiders to stay away. Even now, the forest seems to resist intrusion. GPS devices fail, compasses spin lazily, and cell signals vanish within minutes of crossing a certain invisible threshold. Seasoned hikers have emerged from the woods hours, or days, later than expected, shaken and pale, unable to account for missing time. One man, recovered half a mile from where he was last seen, claimed the trail had led him to a silent meadow where the sky felt too close, pressing down like a weight. He remembered walking forward and then waking up on the forest floor with the search party's voices in his ears. The strangest part? The meadow he described doesn't exist on any survey. In its place is a sheer drop into a ravine. So where do the vanished go when the path dissolves beneath them? And if the trail can truly move, who, or what, is guiding it? They say the hollow gate was built to keep something out, but the older stories whisper that it was meant to keep something in. Its two leaning pillars, worn down by storms and centuries, still stand at the edge of a valley no one farms anymore. The locals swear the grass there grows a shade too pale, as if drained by something that moves beneath it. Travelers who pass at night tell of a figure, tall, thin, and unmoving, standing between the stones, its face lost in shadow. Long before the gate became a ruin, it was guarded day and night by the order of the last watchers. They weren't soldiers in the traditional sense. No swords, no shields, only long staffs carved with runes no one could read. The order had one duty, to keep their eyes fixed on the valley beyond no matter what they saw. And they were forbidden to speak of what appeared there. The last record of the watchers dates back to the mid-1800s, when a visiting priest wrote of faces pressing from the darkness, as though the air itself was a thin curtain. He claimed the watchers stood perfectly still, even as these shapes whispered their names. That priest fled the same night, leaving behind his journal and an ink trail of prayers that turned into frantic scratches. The next morning the villagers found the watchers gone, their staffs planted upright in the dirt. No one knows who the figure at the hollow gate is today. Some believe it's the final member of the order, cursed to remain until the valley's secret is resolved. Others say it's not a man at all, but the thing they were guarding against. Free now, yet unwilling to step beyond the stones for reasons no living soul understands. Sometimes when the fog is heavy, you can stand far enough away and still feel eyes on you. Locals warn that if you ever meet its gaze, you'll wake up on the other side of the hollow gate, with no memory of crossing. But if the barrier was meant to contain what lies beyond, how much time is left before it decides to step through? Beneath the warped floorboards of the abandoned courthouse, past a stairwell that smells of mildew and burnt paper, there is a narrow tunnel carved into the earth. The walls sweat with moisture, and the ceiling hangs so low that even a child would have to bow their head. This passage was never meant to be found. It was dug for one purpose only, to hide the Chamber of Names. The first record of this place appears in an 1821 diary belonging to a clerk who vanished 2 months later. His last entry was barely legible, written in a frantic, cramped scrawl. The ink will not dry down there. It bleeds into the page like it wants to crawl out again. Local historians claimed it was a forgotten storage cellar, but the truth runs deeper. Witnesses, rare and unreliable, say the chamber contains a single round table, carved from some black, porous stone that seems to absorb light. Around it are 12 wooden chairs, their legs uneven as though they were made in haste. Upon the table lies a book the size of a coffin lid. Its pages are thick, brittle, and pale like skin. Every page bears a name. Some are written in looping, elegant script. Others are scrawled as if by trembling hands. The earliest entries date back to the first European settlements, but the ink never fades. When a new name appears, it is not written by human hands. The letters simply form, slowly as if dragged up from the paper by something living beneath it. The folklore says these are the names of those who will vanish. The order is never wrong. Sometimes the victim disappears within days. Other times years pass before their absence is noticed. The cruelest detail? If you find your own name, you cannot remove it. People have tried tearing out pages, burning them, even stealing the book entirely. It always reappears in the chamber, untouched. Except the person who attempted it becomes the next name written. One account from 1894 tells of a schoolteacher who ventured into the chamber with 2 students on a dare. She returned alone, shaking and pale. When asked what happened, she only said, "Their names weren't there when we came in." Both students were never seen again, though their names were later found written in the book in perfectly neat script. Over the decades, access to the courthouse was sealed. The official reason was structural collapse, but those who live nearby know better. They say that on certain nights, always fog-heavy and still, you can hear the slow scratching of a quill beneath the ground. And here's the most unsettling detail. Several names recorded in the chamber belong to people who haven't been born yet. It suggests that whatever force maintains this list isn't bound by time. It knows who will disappear long before they take their first breath. And if that's true, it means the future isn't written in stone. It's written in the chamber of names, and the ink never lies. The story doesn't end when the last shovelful of dirt hits the coffin. In truth, that's where it begins. Beneath every churchyard, every unmarked clearing, every riverbank where the current has long since erased the shoreline, there is a second history, one no law, no archive, and no sermon has ever truly erased. It lingers in the way the soil shifts underfoot, in the cold breath of a fog that rolls in without warning, in the flicker of recognition when you pass a place you've never been, yet your chest tightens as if you have. America's sanctioned history books close their pages on these rituals with a finality meant to comfort. Those were just superstitions, they say. We are past that. But past is not the same as gone. You can outlaw a practice, you can burn the talismans, you can pave over the sacred earth, but you cannot dismantle the pact that was made between the living and the dead. The communities who performed these rites did not see them as choice, but as necessity. A burial was not simply the act of placing a body in the ground, it was an ongoing conversation between the departed and those still breathing. The breaking of that conversation was not just cultural erasure. To those who believed, it was a severing of the very balance that kept the world from tipping into chaos. And so, fragments remain. A pattern in the layout of forgotten headstones. A scrap of cloth knotted in a way no one teaches anymore. The way an elder pauses, mid-sentence, when a certain date or place is mentioned, eyes distant, calculating whether to speak the rest aloud. These are the quiet rebellions against forgetting. Some say the earth itself keeps the memory, storing it deep, far below where plows and shovels reach. And every so often the ground reminds us. A road cracks open to reveal bones no one claimed. A drought drains a pond to expose stones arranged with deliberate symmetry. A developer digs too deep and uncovers artifacts they'd rather believe were meaningless. But meaning has a way of surviving. The rituals that America tried to erase are not just part of the past. They are still here, in the silences, in the absences, in the things we are told not to notice. You might think you've never stood on such ground. But maybe you have, and maybe that strange shiver down your spine was not the wind, but the old agreement stirring, wondering why you haven't been paying your respects, because whether we believe in these rites or not, the land remembers them. And it remembers us.